So my parents often described weird things happening around me as a kid, but this one always freaked out my mum. I was around 4 to 5 years old and I started telling my mum about my friend I'd play with in my room. At the time I was an only child, so my mum chalked it up to my imagination and that it was normal for children to have imaginary friends at this age. But the things I would tell her about this friend of mine made her confused. I referred to him as the man in the wall, and when she asked me why I simply responded, because he walks through my wall. My mum was also confused by the fact I would always tell her that this man in the wall would leave whenever she came to my door like he didn't want to be seen. What confused my mum more is I told her, he always gets my name wrong, he calls me your name, and asks about Auntie. She asked for details and I shared with her that he called my aunt my sister, and I had to correct him every time he came to play. Later on, my mum took me to her mother's house. My grandma is very sentimental, but at times not the most open with emotion, you could say. Her father and mother's deaths were both very traumatic for her. As much as I can remember, she never kept pictures out or talked of them. My mum convinced her to get out some old photo albums on this particular visit. They went through pictures as I played. My mum wanted to share with me pictures of her when she was a child. As she picked me up to see the pictures on the table, I shouted, "That's the man in my wall," pointing at a picture of my grandmother's father. My mum tried to tell me to stop playing, but I started sharing key details about him that I shouldn't have known, such as the hat he wore in the picture. I knew the name of the company on it, and that his glasses were in his shirt pocket, even though he really needed to have them on to see, but insisted he didn't. I even pointed out mannerisms and speech patterns he had, mimicking them like when he spoke to me. And my grandma had never spoke about him before around me. She rarely talked of him ever due to the nature of how he passed. My grandma seemed intrigued when I said he calls me my mum's name and asks about her sister, my aunt. My mum and her sister were young children when he passed. She thinks he was looking for my mum and got confused when he saw me due to my mum's age when he passed. I've had other encounters around that age too, and some when I was older, but that one always makes people think I'm insane when I tell them. I remember most of this and my interactions playing with him as well. Our home has 2 spirits, a little boy of around 10-11 years old and an old man. My son first became aware of the old man when he was playing on his backyard swing one day with his friend a few months after moving into our home. My son and his friend were sitting on the swing together, one of those big saucer ones, and his friend got up. My son stayed seated playing with his toy when he felt the weight of someone sit down on the swing with him. Thinking it was his friend, he began talking to him. From across the yard, his friend asked who he was talking to. My son looked up to where his friend stood on the other side of the yard and realised that someone was still sitting next to him, but he was too afraid to look over all the way. The boys told me this story afterwards, and my son claims that the person next to him was an older man, about his grandfather's age, 65, and looking back on it after that initial shock, he said the man felt friendly. I believe the old man looks out for us. I've had things go missing only for them to end up in odd but helpful places, like someone is moving them for us to help us later. For example, a necklace I wore for years broke the first night we moved in. Upset because it was sentimental to me, I set it on the living room table, and when I went back for it the next day, it was gone. I figured it just got moved by my husband, but he swore he hadn't touched it, and the last place he saw it was the table. My son had no idea it was missing at all until I told him. I found that necklace a year later in my bedside table drawer, buried under papers and junk. Tonight, I lit a candle and set my lighter on the dresser. When I went to grab it again a few minutes later, it wasn't there. I spotted it sitting on the ensuite bathroom windowsill, somewhere I hadn't gone in those few minutes. As I turned to grab it, a spider walked across my bedroom carpet between me and the bathroom. But not just any spider, a brown recluse, and it was heading straight for my bed I was about to get into. If I hadn't been looking for the lighter, I wouldn't have seen it. We've had other things disappear and reappear in this manner many times, and I believe it's that old man trying to help us out. If anyone is interested in this story, I'll post about the little boy next. We think he's from the time before the home was built, and his story is a little creepier. Years ago, I was recovering from a severe manic episode. I was doing well and nearly discharged. I had just moved into a new private room because of my old roommate's terrible snoring. I put my duffel bag on the small bed. The room was cold, dark, and empty. I went to brush my teeth in the little side bathroom. Suddenly, I saw a wispy white figure through the mirror moving across the room. I turned around and my duffel bag was now on the floor beside the door. I put it back on the bed, perplexed and stunned. I've had delusions and seen a lot of weird things suffering from the acute psychosis of mania, but never has an object just moved by itself. I also peered into an empty room late at night in the same psych ward and saw the dark figure of a woman standing there, facing the wall with what seemed to be magazine clippings swirling around her violently. I have no explanation for either experience. Some people I share this with think it was just my bipolar disorder or new medications playing tricks on me. I have excellent visual memory, and what I saw was far too real for that to be the case. When I was a teenager, my dad's house sat right across from this old graveyard. That place was full of weird experiences. One night, I woke up to the sound of kitchen cabinets slamming open and shut. Figured it was just my dad rummaging around for a midnight snack, so I opened my bedroom door, which opened to the view of the kitchen, to tell him to keep it down. But when I opened the door, I saw every cabinet door was wide open, and no one was in there. I even yelled for my dad, but all I heard in response was his loud snoring coming from the basement. I closed the cabinets and doors and went back to bed. The next day I asked him if he had been making noise in the kitchen the night before, and he said he was sleeping and hadn't been in the kitchen. My next experience was one night. My dog suddenly started barking like crazy. Now, this wasn't his usual behaviour unless he was dreaming. I turned over to look at him to try to calm him down, but he was fixated on the closet door, pointing his paw at it like he'd seen a ghost. No pun intended. As I looked over at him, he stopped barking and started whimpering and hid behind me, shaking like crazy. Then the closet door creaked open, and I heard someone or something dragging their feet across the carpet, right up to my bed. Frozen with fear, I watched as the sound stopped, and then I jumped up to turn on the lights, and nothing. No one was there. I spent the rest of that night camped out on the living room couch, cuddling my dog. Last weekend, my family stayed at my grandma's house. I slept on the couch. In the middle of the night, I felt super uneasy because I heard footsteps in the living room where I was sleeping. I thought someone had come through her front door. My body wouldn't let me open my eyes, but I was super aware of my hearing and what I felt. Then I felt a presence kneel down right behind me, touching the back of my neck and very close to my ear. A man's voice said to me, "I love you," and then I felt the presence go away. Today at work, my co-worker and I stumbled upon the subject of ghosts, and I told her this encounter. I mentioned how the presence touched the back of my neck. Almost instantly after saying that, she pointed out that I developed a rash in the exact spot I described the presence touching me. I looked in the mirror and saw how red my neck got. No other part of my body, neck, got this rash. It was red and hot for about 10 min after that. I talked to my grandma about this encounter, and we thought it maybe was her brother who recently passed, or my grandfather who I haven't seen in 10+ years. Family drama. I've never encountered a situation like this before. When I was younger, I used to sleep downstairs in my living room all the time. I was the type of kid to have nightmares, so it wasn't anything new to me or my parents. Well, one night I was on my couch half asleep when I had a feeling someone was looking at me. I turned my head and saw this female-looking figure sitting across from me on the other couch, looking at me and sitting cross-legged. At first, I thought it was my nan or sister, but she was a little too young to be my nan and a little too old to be my sister. So I asked them if they were downstairs last night, to which they both responded no. I then told my nan and parents what happened, and they told me it was just a nightmare. IDK how much time passed, but the exact same thing happened, and this time I knew my nan wasn't at home, and my sister was in her bed upstairs. I also knew I wasn't asleep, because I turned into the couch, threw my blanket over my head, and was frozen with fear, until I built the courage to run to my parents' room. I'm wondering if it was my older sister who passed away before I was born.